Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti Semitism. I am Evelyn Marcus.
And I am Phyllis Zimbler Miller.
It is now almost 15 months since the brutal massacre of Israelis on October 7, 2023. There has been endless news reports and film footage, much from the Palestinian murderers themselves. Yet, many people continue to try to stifle and ignore discussions about these terrorist attacks. Our guest today is 23-year-old Alon Penzel, an Israeli spokesperson, author, journalist, social activist, and TV anchor. He has written the book Testimonies Without Boundaries, Israel, October 7th, 2023. This book provides exclusive, shocking, and unimaginable testimonies of the horrors. Alon, welcome to our podcast, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with how we came to know about you. The digital billboard in New York City's Times Square on December 15th. Can you describe the billboard and what you hope to accomplish with this, and also when you plan to have it go up again?
So I wrote the book in order to make sure that it gets to the hands of as many people as possible. And since the book was out, I have been censored, or people have been trying to censor not only my voice, but also the voices of the victims and the heroes in my book. And the promise I believe that I've kept to myself is to make sure that I fight that censorship, that I fight anyone who's willing to deny the atrocities of October 7th ever happened. And so putting the book and photos of the massacre on Times Square billboard, in front of millions of people was probably the was probably very very I felt like it needed to be done. I felt like people in New York needed to be exposed to what happened on October 7th. I feel like people are trying to, even if they don't deny October 7th, is probably because they don't know enough about what happened on October 7th, and we can't let that minority of extremists dictate the agenda of those who are basically in the middle, who do not necessarily know what happens in the Middle East, what the situation is, those who learn from it from the news, and we know exactly what is broadcast on the news. So my job as an author, as a young Israeli person, is to convey the message from a humane and a humanitarian point of view, putting the massacre on Times Square, making sure that as many people as possible are exposed to the atrocities. This is our duty to commemorate what happened.
Yeah. Do you have the feeling, Alon, that there is more attention in the media for the atrocities that happen in Gaza than the atrocities that happened on October 7th
Definitely,
in
we are.
Israel?
First of all, we are outnumbered. We are outnumbered, and this is difficult to fight the news coverage. And when you are outnumbered, it's hard to fight the agenda and the narrative when you are outnumbered. But what I know is that truth is on my side, and I know that everything that is happening in the Gaza Strip, which is, so many people die and it's terrible. I know that there is one and only cause for that, and it's Hamas terrorist organization, which is cynically using its own people for its own interest, not only hiding behind them and using them as human shields, but also launches rockets from residential territories. I have been in the Israeli army, in the military, and I'll happily elaborate about it. But I've been there seeing how, while Israel provides humanitarian assistance to the people of the Gaza Strip, Hamas and other organizations, terrorist organizations in the Gaza Strip, target specifically those humanitarian trucks in order to prevent the humanitarian equipment from getting to Gazan hands. So whatever happens in Gaza, and sometimes the photos and the whatever happens is terrible. Hamas terrorist organization is the one that is first and foremost harming and hurting its own people. And the Palestinians as well must remember that.
And is it maybe also that Israel itself kept uh, many details from publicity about what happened on October 7th, not to shock the families of the people who it happened to.
I'm sure it has happened, and I know on one hand I can criticize some policies, etc., but I think that what we should be focusing on is taking self-responsibility. And I know I can't control, what countries or governments do. I can control what I, as Alon, do. And since I already foresaw on October 7th that worldwide denial and anti-Semitism that we as Jewish people, but not only, experience around the world, I felt the duty to come up with some kind of document to commemorate the atrocities that happened without any censorship. As you're saying, there is
Yeah.
a sense of sensitivity towards the families, towards the victims, towards everyone who's been through October 7th. And my duty was to remember that obviously there is that sensitivity, but on the other hand, we also have the obligation to make sure it's not denied and that we commemorate what happened. Because if this is what we're facing right now, just imagine what the denial that we're going to face in 50 years from now is going to look like.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. Can you tell us about the collection of first-hand testimonies in the book? And who are these testimonies from?
I was collecting testimonies from Nova survivors, from Zaka volunteers. Zaka is basically the organization responsible for recovering the bodies on October 7th. The bodies were in such difficult condition that it was even hard to understand what they were recovering at the time. Medical teams, rescue teams, recovery teams, Israel's Medical Forensic Institute, basically an institution in Israel that after October 7 was assigned with is a very cool task to look into basically the bodies that were not initially identified, the bodies that Israel was unable to identify, to understand who the person is due to their severe condition. So I was interviewing as many people as possible from different aspects of October 7th, trying to collect testimonies from what happened in the kibbutzim, to families that stayed in their houses, um, to young people in the Nova Festival, to the deadly roads, from children to elderly to women who were sexually abused, men who were sexually abused as well. Animals who we hardly talk about it because October 7th was so severe, but dogs and cats were just shot on the street for no reason. So from my side, I was trying to basically collect and cover as many aspects of October 7th as possible, so it would be basically a good representation of the massacre, of the slaughter.
And
Yes.
just to clarify, it's in their own words as in the book. So you quote these people. That's what the book is, their testimonies.
It is their testimonies. I was making sure that I do not send, I had lots of deliberations, how to put it in the book. The atrocities that were carried out on October 7th, obviously, are so graphic, are so terrible, incomprehensible, unimaginable. And I was trying carefully to think how to put them in the book until I got understanding. I realized that in order to fight that worldwide denial, I have one assignment, and it's to put the atrocities in the book just as they happened, just as they occurred, without any censorship, just as the way I received it from those who gave me the testimonies, without trying to soften what happened. For two reasons. One is that I don't think I have the legitimacy to soften what happened. And on the other hand, I would say that in order to fight that denial, as I've just said, there is no other way but to provide all the uncensored, very elaborated and specified and detailed atrocities that occurred. Otherwise, we won't be able to fight it.
I wanted to say that I thought your technique was very interesting. In the first chapter that I read, the Zeka Volunteers, I had heard some of that testimony in documentaries, etc. But you had the courage, and I do use that word meaningfully, to ask follow-up questions that weren't so clear when a news bite says something. And you frequently say, that you had to get up the courage to ask the next question to make it clear. And I thought that was a very important technique that you used.
I always say that the first challenge was to get those people to even talk to me. But the more challenging part was once you sit with them in front of them and they tell you their story, their testimony, you have to confront them with very difficult, challenging, and sometimes I would even say insensitive questions in order to do those follow-ups that you just mentioned. Because just imagine when someone speaks with you and they have just been through a trauma, through a tragedy. So they say we saw bodies and there were atrocities and the visuals were horrible, but they do not share the specifics with you. And I had to get to the bottom of what happened on October 7th. I needed those specifics, and in order to get to those specifics, you have to address the person in front of you who's just lost his friends or family members. And once he tells you about, let's say an example, tells you about a friend of his who just got executed in front of him, you have to confront him and ask, I'm sorry, but can you tell me how he was executed? How did it look like? And insist until he tells you that he saw his brain exploding in front of him. And this is how intense the conversations and the dialogues and the testimonies, the interviews with those people were. They were intense because I had to keep insisting to get to the bottom of what happened. Even when I felt like I was crossing the line, I felt like I was doing the right thing. Although it was it wasn't the easy thing, but it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, and I think it's important for history's sake, but it's also important for us to realize who we are dealing with in Israel as our neighbors.
Yes,
As I said, yeah. Sorry.
there's there's a huge difference between saying executed in front of someone and literally describing seeing the brain explode.
Right.
And I think the words themselves, executed, we read that word all the time, is not enough. So we commend you for your courage. But let's go back to censorship. I understand that Amazon initially blacklisted your book. Is that true? And what happened?
I was very excited when the book was finally available in English. The very initial goal has been from the very beginning to make sure that the international community is exposed to the atrocities. So I was uploading the manuscript to Amazon. And not long after, I received the notification from Amazon saying that the book was blacklisted due to violation of their guidelines. Obviously, I was wondering what the guideline that had been violated was. I was trying to ask them, but never received any response. Up until now, I have not received any response from Amazon what guideline was which guideline was violated. Only after press coverage, the Amazon reversed its decision, and obviously the book now is available on Amazon. And by the way, some kind of a sweet revenge is that it reached a #1 bestseller in some of Amazon's categories. Once they're trying to silence us, we're speaking up even louder. So they were trying to blacklist. They basically did blacklist the book once it was initially uploaded. They reversed their decision, and a few months later, when I was trying to advertise the book on Amazon as well, they blacklisted they advertised the ad as well. That this time they argued that they cannot advertise the book due to current events. I'm quoting, due to current events. And I'm wondering with you, what are current events? What are the current events that prevent Amazon from advertising the book? My current events, from what I know, is that there are currently 100 hostages in Gaza who are still being held in unbelievable conditions. These are the current events that I'm referring to. But apparently Amazon is referring to other current events, and it blacklisted my advertisement about the book as well. So we're dealing with different challenges, with different censorships. But just as we began with the billboard on Times Square, my goal, my purpose is to make sure that as long as they try, they can try to keep censoring us, they can try to silence us, and this is what they're doing. I will keep speaking up, and I'll do it more determinately every time they try to silence me. It just gives me the understanding that what I'm doing is super important. It gives me the understanding that if I don't do it, no one else will do it for me. Um, and I think we have the responsibility, each of us, to remember that if we are being censored, there's probably a reason for that, and we're doing something good. So I'm encouraging every Jew in the diaspora, but not only, every pro-Israeli supporter, every rational human being who condemns the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, to take action and commemorate what happened there. This is the most simple request from every rational human being, I think, regardless of his religion or his nationality.
Yes, we agree with that. Um, the Amazon page for the book now carries this warning. This book contains graphic and difficult to read descriptions of the horrific atrocities that were committed, and its content is not suitable for children under the age of 14. Could you share with us a couple of the book's descriptions that would be suitable for children under the age of 14?
That would be suitable. Yeah. Um, so I think the third part, the third chapter where it speaks about Nova survivors, it's a very different chapter from others. Many testimonies in the book discuss the atrocities that occurred, and they're very graphics. But when it comes to the young party goers from all around the world, from the Nova party, there's something different. Looking at those people, young people just in my age, who had to make super difficult decisions in the ground, in order to decide how they basically pave their escape routes. They didn't survive because they just had luck. They were actually making sure to pave their escape routes, to make sure to pave their route towards survival. Some of them had to make super difficult decisions on the ground, such as, do I keep running for my life, or do I stop and further jeopardize it by stopping to help my friend who just fell on the run or just got shot? Um, People in the Nova Festival who were on drugs, people who were with family members or with friends of, they came there with either family members or friends, and some of them were lost so many, some of them survived, some of them still feel, have feelings of guilt. I think the third chapter is not only suitable for children under the age of 14, but also shares some very human, sensitive, personal stories about young people who made brave decisions on the ground, decisions that they're probably still living with and will probably live with until the end of their lives. Um, I think the most personal stories where kids, children, teenagers, just in my age, sometimes younger, sometimes older, call their parents, telling them about the difficult situation at the Nova party, telling them that they will do everything in order to survive. The parents are crying on the phone, having nothing to do, so innocent, so helpless. Just imagine if you are a parent who is watching us right now, just imagine that your child is in a current massacre and you are basically helpless. You can do nothing in order to help him. One of the very emotional testimonies, it's a short one, but that I included in the book, is about a Nova a Nova survivor. Basically, she was in Nova and she was calling her parents, telling them, there is a massacre here, we're being shot at, and I'm trying to survive. I'll do whatever I can in order to survive. And in that case, the parents weren't satisfied about just sitting at home and waiting to hear updates about their daughter. The father actually went down there in order to save her, and she survived, but the father was murdered. And those are personal stories that are truly hard to comprehend. Personal stories that are hard to comprehend, stories of courage and resilience of the Israeli people. And on the other hand, very sad stories that are part of us and that will remain with us.
Yes. So for the younger under 14 reader, you describe more the decision-making process
Yeah,
of people on the
and
ground, young people on the ground in the Nova Festival on how to survive and also of the parents and family who heard about and friends maybe who heard about what was happening down there and who made certain decisions in some cases to go down there and try to help. Can you also give us a story of from the book of some that was very graphic, that is very graphic, that is not for children under 14, maybe meant for children under 14.
one of the most difficult stories, testimonies from the book, I believe, is when some of the rescue forces entered the kibbutzim after the massacre. Kibbutzim is basically the Israeli villages, towns where the terrorists infiltrated during the attack. And they found a mattress, and they found a girl, a woman, a lady, young lady who was tied up to the mattress. She was obviously dead. The rescue forces were trying to extract her from the mattress, but couldn't, and didn't understand why they couldn't extract her from the mattress, the body. And they lifted the mattress, and on the other side of the mattress was a man. And the rescue forces found out that the couple was basically tied up to the mattress from both sides of it using metal wires that were inserted through their stomachs into their bodies. And this is how the terrorists tied them up together on both sides of the mattress. Both of them, by the way, were also naked. Another testimony I can share with you is, and since I have two nephews and two nieces who are very dear to me, I think testimonies about children and kids are very emotional and hard to all of us. But that testimony about the rescue forces entering one of the kibbutzim, finding a child who was not only burnt, but also had a knife stuck inside his skull, inside his brain, inside his skull. And next to the boy's burnt little body was also a hammer. On the hammer itself were still pieces of the child's skull. And I think those testimonies, and I just described with you two out of dozens of testimonies of just as hard, just as cruel, demonstrate not only the cruelty of Hamas terrorists, but also the fact that Hamas terrorists, and basically every terrorist who infiltrated and invaded Israel that day, didn't come here only in order to murder, but also in order to abuse, humiliate, torture, rape, terrorize, frighten. They had very clear instructions. It was very much premeditated because the atrocities, I'm frequently asked, did the atrocities that you have just described, did they happen, in one specific location, in one specific incident, or did it happen everywhere? And I always say it happened everywhere. It was very much premeditated. They came here not only in order to murder, but also in order to exterminate the Israeli and the Jewish spirit. They had a very clear goal to do it. Obviously, they haven't managed to do it. Here we are, standing strong. We'll keep standing strong. But if that was their goal, yes, that was their goal. Not only to kill and murder, but also slaughter, humiliate, torture, abuse. Absolutely.
Yes.
I noticed in the book that there was a sentence that really leaped out in which it said many of these barbarians didn't have weapons. They just came with axes. And I read that sentence more than once. I thought, they just came with axes? Where'd they get? I mean, it goes beyond thinking when you think about it.
Yes, many of the atrocities that were committed were carried out by people who did not have guns, did not have grenades, did not have any explosives. They basically improvised, taking either axes or knives or metal objects that they had, um, using them in order to torture people. Um, they didn't necessarily come with those objects from the Gaza Strip. Some of them did, some of them did not. Some of them just improvised on in the ground how not only to murder people but also how to torture them. Yes, this is the extent of cruelty of October 7th. Absolutely, this is hard to comprehend.
And how I understood it, tell me if I'm wrong, is so these people that didn't come with any weapons, they weren't part of the planning of Hamas. These were, I don't want to say this, I'm putting words in your mouth, everyday Palestinians, I don't know if that's the right word, who just saw what was happening and just rushed to join in the massacre.
I wish it was different and I wish I didn't have to say that, but many Palestinians from the Gaza Strip, Palestinian residents who weren't officially Hamas operatives or Islamic Jihad operatives, who weren't officially affiliated with the terrorist organizations in Gaza, just used the opportunity to infiltrate Israel and invade Israel while the fence was open and commit atrocities, either raping people or torturing them or looting houses or any different kind of atrocities. Yes, many people, especially those who came from during the second wave after Hamas terrorists broke into the country, just used the opportunity they had in order to torture people who, by the way, many of them used to host their either friends or relatives in their own houses and provide living for them. So this is unfortunate, but this is the truth. Many of them did not have weapons because they weren't official operatives of terrorist organizations, but improvised on the ground and were sometimes as cruel as, or sometimes even crueler than the Hamas terrorists themselves.
Although we
Have
can't, I just want to say we can probably say that they were very much influenced by Hamas propaganda from the time that they were
Absolutely.
born. But okay, go ahead, Evelyn.
have you, Alon, have you heard um, people giving testimonies who gave testimonies to you? Have you heard them talk about, these people, many have been close to what happened. Um, have you heard any um, explanation from them for the perpetrators? What drove the perpetrators? Why did the perpetrators not only wage war with the Israelis, but tortured them and went so far in their crimes against humanity? Did you hear any explanation from the people who gave testimony about what happened?
I did, and I think that you learn it along the way, and you understand it along the way, and it's very much related to what you, Felice, said about Hamas. Growing up with Hamas, I think the number one cause for the cruelty that was carried out on October 7th is the incitement that Hamas basically has been leading in Gaza Strip since it got to power. Um, Incitement that where kids are born to learn that the people, the other side is not we're not humans, we're monsters, we're worse than that, we're creatures that have to be eliminated as fast as possible. And I think once you grow up to that understanding, um, this is the result, and it is very much similar to the propaganda, Nazi propaganda from 1933 to 1939. You ask yourself how, and my grandfather is a Holocaust survivor. You ask yourself how so many people were capable of committing such terrible atrocities during the Holocaust. And the reason for that, for me, is the propaganda that was led by the Nazi regime. And this is just the same. Hamas has been leading a very cruel propaganda against the Israeli people and Jewish people since it got to power. And the result is people who see the other side as no less than monsters, and then are capable of committing such horrible atrocities. Obviously, there isn't any sense of justification here, just in order to understand how this can even be done by, of course, not even human beings and not even animals, but monsters. How that can even be done. I think the incitement is the number one reason, and unfortunately, that incitement, I believe, happens not only in the Gaza Strip but also in the Palestinian Authority. And this is something that has to be stopped. This is perhaps the worst obstacle, the main reason for the attack, the cruelty on October 7th, and the worst obstacle for any progress in the future. Um, and again, the incitement that led by Hamas is the cause of October is one of the causes of October 7th, but is also one of the reasons. And you asked me that at the beginning of the conversation, and I'll say it again. Whatever happens in Gaza, whatever the number of casualties is in the Gaza Strip, the reason it happens is Hamas terrorist organization using its own people as human shields, harming them, using them for its terrorist interests. While Israel provides help for the Gaza residents, Hamas uses that help in order to promote its terrorist interests, stealing the equipment from their own people, targeting that equipment in order to make sure it doesn't reach the residents' hands, launching from residential territories. This is hard to comprehend how an organization that is supposed to be dedicated to the safety of its people is the number one cause for why their life is difficult. And we've been hearing accusations and allegations against Israel since the beginning of the war regarding what's happening in Gaza. So we have to say what is happening in Gaza is Hamas's responsibility, obligation, and in consequences of its actions. And I believe, by the way, that the Gazans understand it not less than we do, by the way.
We're coming close to the end of the interview, but we have two more questions. And the next one is particularly important based on your work, your amazing work. Why are people, now I'm talking around the globe, so reluctant to discuss the terrible atrocities of October 7th? Is it because people just shy away from atrocities? Or is it, I hate to use the word political, but are there other reasons?
I think there are reasons. The main reason that people are, either denying October 7th ever happened, or saying it did happen but in a different way, or some I've heard some accusation that October 7th did happen but it was Israel that premeditated everything. I think the reason for that is in order to avoid having to provide any argument in favor of October 7th, because they just can't. They're trying. It's people who either support Hamas or driving by people who support Hamas, and cannot give any excuse of October 7th. So they just argue that it never happened, or argue that the atrocities that we described happened never did. I think the main reason for it is trying to give any kind of excuse for what happened by saying it never did, but by saying it never happened. And I'm encouraging. I think we hear so many deniers of October 7th worldwide. I personally think that this is not the majority. I think that there is a large group, the majority of people who don't know enough about what happened on October 7th, who don't know enough about what happened in what happens in general in the Middle East. And we have to make sure that the majority extremists, the extremist majority, doesn't dictate the agenda for the majority of people. That extremist minority doesn't dictate the agenda for the majority of people who do not actually know what happened. We have to contradict the deniers.
Evelyn, do you want to ask the last question?
Yes, Alon, what can our listeners do on their own to push back against the distortion and denial of October 7th?
I think Since the book was out, I've been on world tours, in different countries, in the United States and in England, in different countries, and I will be more in order to make sure that the atrocities and the testimonies from my book are spread around the world. I've heard so many people say that it is becoming more and more dangerous for either Jews or pro-Israelis to speak up. And I'm not judging it. I am not saying it is uncomfortable to speak. It is comfortable to speak up. I'm sure it might be uncomfortable sometimes. I'm sure it might feel risky sometimes. But I want to encourage everyone who's watching us right now to speak up. As hard as it might be, as uncomfortable as it might be, we have to speak up. We have the obligation to speak up. Testimonies Without Boundaries, I created that document in order to be a historical commemoration document that will stay with us for generations to come, so no one will be able to deny the atrocities. Don't only get the book, make sure you read it in order to know exactly what happened, and make sure you provide the deniers with the exact details of what happened, as they will have nothing to contradict you with. I'm encouraging you to speak up. We are outnumbered, but the truth is on our side, and the truth is what matters most. We have the power, we have the resilience and the strength of the Jewish and Israeli people. Speak up, be proud of your identity. We have the obligation to do so. We don't have, the privilege to just wait for someone else to do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. Speak up, get the book, get out there, and we'll do it together.
That's a wonderful final statement. Although, if you want to add anything else, including, do you know the date when you're going to have the billboard again in Times Square so people in New York can see it? Do you have?
I'll definitely. It will be after Christmas. I'll get it updated. I don't know the exact date yet, but I'll definitely make sure that it gets to as many people as possible before it is displayed, so people can get there. The book, by the way, is available on Amazon, and as we discussed, Amazon was trying to blacklist the book. Let's make sure no one is able to silence us. The book is now available not only in English but also in Spanish, French, Portuguese, Chinese. Get the book. Yeah, exactly. And it will be translated to more languages in the future, as we need to get to as many people as possible. Get the book, review it on Amazon, by the way, because if it is not reviewed, there are so many people who never read the book but just review it,
The reviews.
In order to make sure Amazon removes the book again or reports it. So review it on Amazon.
Positively. If you wanted to do a negative review, don't do it. Go.
Exactly. So let's prevail together. We will prevail. Let's do it together.
Thank you so much. This has been a very, very heartfelt and compelling discussion. I thank you. I thank our listeners. For those of you who would like to know more about Evelyn's activities and my activities besides the podcast, go to Never Again Is Now podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. And please, as we ask at the end of every episode, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.